when I say that.
Okay, welcome to the regular monthly meeting of the Morgantown Utility Board for September 21st, 2023. We welcome those of you who are attending. First order of business is approval of minutes from the last meeting, which was August the 8th. I assume everyone had a chance to read those minutes.
I move to approve.
All right, we have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Any corrections or objections? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Now we have a public portion, and tonight our new business includes the Source Water Protection Plan presentation, which does permit questions from the public. I don't know if anyone has any issues to bring forward that do not pertain to that. That would be a part of the public portion. Or are you here to address those issues? Okay. So, hearing no one from the public portion, do we have any letters or anything that we need?
No letters.
Okay. So that takes us to new business. Okay, Mike?
Okay, before we start, I'd like to introduce Chris Linger this evening. Chris, he is been a senior engineer with MUB in our engineering department. Chris has taken on a new role. He has replaced Jake Fischel down at the wastewater treatment plant as the assistant manager. And so we're very pleased and have great expectations for Chris as he takes on this new role with MUB. And I want to make sure that got acquainted with the board of directors this evening.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Congratulations, Chris.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Do your job.
Yes.
And now I'm going to introduce Greg Shelto. He's going to kind of bring us up to the source water protection plan.
2014, exactly January 9th. It's hard to believe it's almost been 10 years, but that marks the event when Freedom Industries, one of their above ground storage tanks, leaked a good amount of MCHM into the water supply for the Charleston and the surrounding area. That caused a large amount of grief, hardships, people without water for weeks, some even months. This was not unnoticed by the legislators. They took very quick and decisive action, and in 2014 actually passed Senate Bill 373, which was the source water protection bill. That dictated that the health department, or DHHR, develop a set of rules and regulations for source water protection. That was all passed and the rules were out, and by 2015 MUB actually put in the first water protection program. I believe it was one of the first, if not the first, that the state actually got for their approval. Now, part of that bill says that every 3 years you need to revisit your plan, you need to revise it, and then resubmit it back to them. So this is what we're doing right now. We have to have a little public and a presentation to the public on the revised plan. And so we're going to have Mr. Evan Hansen and Kendra Hatcher from Downstream Strategies. They're our consultants with this program. They're going to actually walk you through it very quickly. So our 2023 source water protection plan update.
All right, thanks, Greg. Am I supposed to talk into this?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Greg. The spirit of source water protection is to look upstream from the intakes and to try to manage the risks of potential contamination. And then if something were to happen, to respond to those risks or respond to the contamination in an effective way. And if you look upstream from the intakes for the city of Morgantown or for Morgantown Utility Board, it's a large part of the state of West Virginia. That's that gray area on this map. And to zoom in on that a little bit further, gives you a better sense. If you go all the way to the southern end of the watershed, that's around Snowshoe. And so theoretically, anything that reaches the surface water in any part of this watershed eventually will make its way down to the intake. Now, if it's further away, it's less of a risk. If it's less toxic, it's less of a risk. But the challenge in doing source water protection is trying to manage the risk in that large area. It's 1.7 million acres, 11 counties. And the zone of critical concern that's mentioned here, that's 12,000 acres, we'll zoom into, but first define it. This is in code. The zone of critical concern is the corridor along the rivers up to a 5-hour travel time to the intake. So in other words, if any pollutant reaches the river, it'll get to your intake within 5 hours. And then there's an additional area above that called the zone of peripheral concern, or ZPC, and that's a 5 to 10 hour travel time to the intake. And this is what those zones look like for Morgantown Utility Board. The red area, so you can see that it's like a buffer around the Mon River and the tributaries. That's the zone of critical concern for the primary intake. And the green area is the zone of critical concern for the Coben Creek intake, at least for the previous Coben Creek intake. And then the black area is the zone of peripheral concern for the Mon River. There's no ZPC for Coben Creek because there's no 5 to 10 hour travel time to get to that intake. The legislation that Greg mentioned that passed in 2014 has very specific requirements for what needs to be in a source water protection plan. It includes a management plan, and we'll get into this in a lot more detail. Kendra, when she takes over in a few slides, she'll get into the details. But it does include a management plan. It includes an inventory of the potential significant contaminant sources within the zone of critical concern. It includes a contingency plan and a communications plan. It includes certain technical information that are listed here and some information about whether it's possible to switch to an alternative intake and things like that. Now, MUB is very well positioned compared to many water systems across the state because you have 2 intakes. And now that the new dam is built, you're in an even better position than so many other water systems across the state. So just to kind of summarize that, the management plan and the potential significant contaminant sources, really what we're looking for are steps that MUB and the community can take to minimize the risk of contamination, to figure out what those risks are and minimize those risks. And then the contingency and communication plans are more about what happens should contamination occur. How do you respond to that, and how do you communicate with the public about it? And the last thing I wanted to mention before turning it over to Kendra is that underlying our source water protection efforts, many of these different things, is a piece of custom software that we built for MUB that we've been maintaining for the last 6-7 years, I guess. It's called the MUB Monitor, and it helps with different aspects of source water protection. What you see here is the spill response aspect of the MUB Monitor, where you can specify a spill anywhere in the watershed, and that's what that red line is with the marker furthest to the south. That's a hypothetical spill, and it tracks a spill all the way to the Mon River, and then from the Mon River to the intake. And it provides information in the upper left, the threat matrix, to try to help the managers in the treatment plant understand how big of a threat it is and how quickly they may need to take action to, for example, close the intake and switch to Coben Creek. So there's this spill response aspect to the MUB Monitor software tool. And then there's a data management aspect to it. And this illustrates how all the NPDES, these are the water pollution control permits in the watershed, are mapped. We also have information about the coal mines and the oil and gas wells and all the other types of potential contaminant sources, and this helps us manage that risk. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kendra to go into the details.
Great, thank you. So as Evan mentioned, that there's sort of 2 big sections that we talk about. We have activities that we want to prevent contamination, and then there are actions we would take if in the event of a spill. So I'm going to sort of go through some of the things that we do to help prevent contamination. The idea when working with MUB and trying to create this plan, we wanted to create an actual program that would be active, that we were taking steps in some cases daily, but certainly weekly, monthly. So certainly being very proactive about the type of actions we were taking to protect the source water. So just to kind of run through a couple of those. When we were going through and trying to figure out different strategies, the one thing we had to think about is the difference between the two watersheds. Again, with having the Mon watershed and the Coben Creek watershed, they were two very significantly different watersheds. So some of the actions that we would take in the entire Mon watershed aren't necessarily as relevant in the Coben Creek. So we sort of broke it down and thought about them a little bit differently. So as you guys know, we have the Mon watershed, which is a large, very large, very urban, industrial watershed. There are significant transportation corridors along the Mon, and there are many, many potential significant contamination sources. And that term, the potential significant contaminant sources, is also sort of set up in the code of the type of things that we're concerned about. So again, they don't mean that it's actively dumping chemicals or contamination, but these are places where a spill could potentially happen. For instance, above ground storage tanks or NPDES permits or gas wells, any number of things. So one of the main things that we do as part of the management plan is the potential significant contaminant sources inventory. So we want to know where those things are. We want to know what they are. If they're tanks, for instance, we want to know how big are they? What is in them? So a large portion that we do regularly is update that contaminant source inventory. I'm going to just go through a couple of maps as examples here. The light blue that you can see is the Upper Mon watershed. So we are looking outside of just that ZCC, and we're looking at any potential contaminant sources within that Upper Mon watershed and just understanding what is there. This is just showing NPDES coal permits, surface mine footprints. So you can see there's a lot of that activity still in the watershed. This map showing that same area, the blue is conventional oil and gas well permits, for instance. The red are Marcellus shale permits. So just understanding these throughout the watershed. And this one just happens to show where underground injection control wells are, landfill. So we're really trying to keep track of a number of different things all the time. And even though the actual plan gets updated every 3 years, we actually go through a process to update these numbers every single year. So these numbers are current for the 2023 plan, but we just keep track of how many of these different potential contaminant sources are within the ZCC, because that's our greatest concern because it's the closest to the intake, but also within the entire watershed. So again, that's something we spend time doing. Other things that we do, we review aerial photographs. In that instance, we try to find the most up-to-date aerial photographs to see, are there things that are out there that we might not be catching by permits? Are there things that we can notice that are going on we might not see otherwise? Same with windshield surveys, where we're actually driving around within the ZCC and the closest watershed, see if there's anything of concern. We research toxicity of chemicals if we learn about new chemicals that are in tanks, for instance. We look at public notices and basically trying to understand the activities that are going on in the watershed. And in some cases, we respond to them if there's something we're concerned about. We also communicate with the potential threats. We've sent out letters before and basically, letting people know, hey, there's this program and we are concerned, our intent isn't to let them know, hey, you're in trouble, but we're here, we're concerned. If you have questions or if something happens, make sure that we're one of the first people that you're communicating with. The other thing that MUB has done is trying to identify if there are pollution issues before contamination occurs. And we do that in a couple different ways. First, by actually collecting source water data and then performing real-time monitoring. So since 2015, MUB has gone out throughout the watershed, through the main stem of the Monongahela and in Coben Creek and some of the tributaries, and collect water samples. This is something that's done depending how close it is, either on a quarterly or twice a year basis. So we have an amazing data set of what the water looks like throughout the watershed. So that's really great. We sample approximately 50 analytes. And that's all information, as Evan mentioned, the MUB monitor, all this data, all the things that we're doing here and collecting go into that MUB monitor, so it's easy to access. MUB also has the SCADA system that's real-time monitoring of the water coming into the system as it's entering the plant. And then in 2021, with help from additional funding from DHHR grants, they were established an early warning system. So if anybody's out on the rail trail, and you're going for a bike ride or a walk, you see this funny looking yellow thing out in the river, this is the real-time monitoring location, which is approximately 30 minutes upstream. So, yeah. There is a notification for the down. I mean, yeah, they are supposed to notify the downstream provider, but in some cases, not everybody knows who that downstream provider is. That system isn't very clear and sometimes gets a little confusing of who's supposed to be notified. So, but this would be, this is a really interesting thing. This actually is downstream of the 79 overpass. You know, we talk a lot about sort of stationary things like ASTs, above ground storage tanks. But another concern, again, with these major transportation corridors is what happens if there's a bad accident on 79. So this provides some information. If something happens, a tank rolls over the bridge or there's some sort of spill, there are indicator parameters that this thing collects, like conductivity, it's collecting pH, temperature, things like that, that if there, you know, we have a data set, and if something is out of the ordinary, it'll sort of flag, like, wait a second, what's going on? So this is a great system. Now, in Coven Creek, obviously, we're still keeping track of if there are any permits or the MPDS or things like that, but there's just not a whole lot going on in that watershed. It's it's forested, primarily residential or agricultural watershed, so there's just not as much stuff going on in that watershed, which is great. I mean, it's an awesome resource, and, you know, as I live in Morgantown, it's amazing to have that and know that our drinking water is safe. So, of course, having the new Flegel Dam and Reservoir has been great. We have almost 30 days of storage now, and if there was an event on the Mon, you know, Morgantown is in a pretty good place. The other thing that MUB set up was the Watershed Protection Program, which is a voluntary program to communicate with landowners. The idea is, you know, trying to think about ways that we can continue to protect that watershed, you know, and understand if there are actions that they can, you know, by their choice decide if they want to help protect their source water. So that's the stuff we actively do on a regular basis. And again, we had the other components are the contingency plan and the closely tied communications plan. So during this process, the contingency plan is what do you actually do if there is a spill, and the communication plan is tied to that. So if an event happens, what do you do? Who's closing down? You know, when does the intake get closed? How serious is it? When does the intake get closed? Who do you communicate with? How do you communicate with the public? How do you get the information out that's noted? How do you make sure people have the correct information and you're not sparking fear, that everybody understands what's actually happening? We were lucky to, when we were developing this plan, we were working with local responders, with MECA, with the Mon County Health Department, and they went through and with the plan as well. So they're sort of on board with the actions that we would take, and, you know, they're part of that plan as well. The communications plan, again, that's, you know, some of that is the stuff MECA and those other groups were involved, but, you know, what happens internally in MUB, you know, who's sort of the first line of communication. The document also actually has scripts for how, you know, if when calls come in, how to communicate with folks, you know, how to send out, of course now with social media, how do you, you know, communicate via Facebook or Twitter or all those sorts of things. So again, it's a very detailed plan of what do we actually do. So I think that is all that I had. So again, as Greg mentioned, this is something, oh, sorry, yeah.
Who should communicate with what audiences? You might include the Mon County Emergency Response. Mm-hmm. Jamie Moore is in charge of that, and you might include him in that list.
Oh. Yes.
I have a question. You said early in your presentation that letters are sent out to the various entities that potentially should be notified for their participation in this. Does that letter come from MUB? Does it come from downstream?
Everything's come from MUB. I mean, our is supporting MUB. So that was a while ago. We sent out that communication, but the idea is to come from MUB, and the letters describe what the program was. And again, not that anybody's upset or that anything happened, but just to, you know, let them know about the program and, that MUB would like to be informed.
The second thing is all these storage units. Who permits these storage units? Because it's of concern to me. Some would be permitted by WBDEP, I'm sure. But the lack of any land use planning or zoning in the county means that storage units or storage facilities could go up on private property and we would never know about it. Or is there a notification requirement? Those kind of storage units.
Or you mean like individual storage units, like sort of all those like commercial storage units?
No, I'm talking about
Tanks.
tanks.
Oh, tanks. Yeah. There is a permitting process through DEP for those, but of course there is a size, limit. They have to be greater than 1,320. I was going to say 50. 1,320 gallons. Right.
Older than that could be something that's a chemical that's not regulated by WBDEP, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so this states we have almost 9,500 above ground storage tanks in the entire watershed. Does that include propane tanks that people would have beside their house? Not like ones for the grill, but ones for their house?
That wouldn't meet the minimum requirements that are established underneath the rules and regulations.
Then what are we talking about with, darn near 10,000 storage tanks? What's the kind of the range on what those tanks are?
Those are all the regulated. So those are the regulated tanks that go through the permitting process, and they can be
At least 1,320
yes,
gallons.
yes, and they can be a lot of them are diesel or gasoline tanks for sure. There are tanks associated with the oil and gas development, with the brine tanks.
Some are brine tanks. Quite a few of them are.
Yeah.
Ground or
Yes.
some of them underground?
These are all above ground
Yeah,
storage
there's-
tanks.
What about the underground ones?
187 underground,
Yeah.
2 in the ZCC.
We also have polled the DEP for their database of the underground storage tanks also, and we include that in our database.
Okay. One of the problems we've been having on I-79 is the inordinate number of tractor-trailer accidents, some of which involve potentially hazardous materials. Do we ever do, after one of these types of events, an after-the-fact evaluation of the responses and how they went and whether the appropriate parties were addressed in a timely fashion?
For something like that event, we have not gone through a live or after accident type evaluation of that. We do have the DEP spill monitoring report thing. We constantly get updates from that, as to what has occurred, where it's occurred, what's involved in that. And we basically use that as our criteria to look at it, to see if it's something that will be in our watershed. If it is, what is it? And then, how long before it gets to our intake.
Do we have any report on the number of these occur on a monthly or an annual basis that require tripping the communications plan, notifying the various affected entities so that we can track and see over time if there's some patterns in those types of responses?
I'd like to see a report like that as well.
Yeah. We have not created a report like that, and I guess that would be probably coming through the spill responses, or
that would be our primary data source, yes.
right, or reaching out to DEP themselves and seeing if that's something that the data that they keep track of, that sort of stuff. So
I think it would be very helpful to have that kind of data to see if there are any specific patterns or locations where those incidents occurred so that we can take more proactive action to make sure that it doesn't occur again.
yeah, that is a good point. Yeah.
It would be nice if
It's
somebody
something
would
we may
do that.
look into in the future. I can tell you to date, we've only had less than 5 incidences where we've had a significant amount of chemical released, or it has a high enough toxicity that we were concerned about it. And only once or twice in this time period have we actually shut down our intake on the Mon and then diverted it over to Cloven Creek. Not because there was an actual threat, just out of an abundance of caution. So the system does work. As Kent mentioned, we can go from one source to another in less than 5 minutes.
I would hope that if this occurs, you would notify us, and I'm sure you're very good about telling us about specific events that have
Oh,
occurred
yes.
in our system.
Anytime there was an event of that magnitude,
Right.
we would inform everyone.
Can you include a note in the quarterly or twice a year that says this is how many have occurred, even if it's nil?
Yes, but I will tell you, the number of spill reports we receive are significant. We receive them daily, and it is any type of a spill, not just what could affect an intake. There's a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
There might be some antifreeze that hits the pavement, and it's reported. It will have no stream effect whatsoever.
So can you
We had a spill
screen those
report.
for the ones that will affect the intakes and just report on the intake? And if you can't,
So
That's
far,
crazy.
I can't. Yes, we could do that. Anything that we would find that would have any impact on our intakes, we would report that.
See, I think they would be graded like an A, B, C, D, or F, some type of grading system so you can see the severity of what that was.
So you're talking about anything, as
Oh,
small or
not-
large?
No, not anything,
It
but
sounds
I'm,
like there's quite a volume that
Right.
we
just
really
impacts the intakes and the intakes.
No, I think
Not-
it's
not all of
the
not
more
all of them.
the more significant ones.
Yeah.
We need to see if there are any, is there a specific pattern? Are there locations on I-79 where this is occurring on a regular basis? And there have probably been some on I-79, maybe even outside our watershed, where there have been tanker trucks that have spilled and caused potential rupture of the tanks and affecting our watershed.
Or are there entities that seem to have containment issues, leaks or whatever spillage that occur? It's not major, but over time it's constant.
But there are other monitoring systems that would address those, I would think, as far as. Yeah, if you have a business and you have responsibility and you have regular problems, I would assume that the environmental protection.
And
Well, that-
like the one down in Charleston, they're going to tell you voluntarily. They certainly weren't upfront about that in Charleston either when it happened. So there should be something on our end that monitors that to make sure that businesses, what we collect, kind of.
Well, one other thing, just that I can mention that we also do is I did mention, we review public notices, but we also go through. The DEP has a system that you can pull information about certain facilities, but we can pull any notices we can pull like all notices of violation, for instance. So we have a list of sort of our hotspots
Okay.
of facilities that either, even in the past 20 years that have had some sort of violations or sort of those like repeat offenders, so we kind of keep track on them and we pull data on those regularly to see if anything has changed.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, and we
That's
keep
the
a
kind of
record of this.
monitoring I think
Yeah.
we need to.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's something else that we do and keep track of.
Okay.
So
I'm glad to live in a community where this board acted when it did to create that second intake source and put the new reservoir in, because I was living out of state when the Charleston issue happened, and that was national, if not international news. It's a very terrifying specter, and one not only have a group locally that can help us with stuff like this, but then to take the action and have that second reservoir is vital.
I have friends who live in Charleston who still occasionally have water problems, blue water.
Okay, there are other questions?
Yeah, Kendra, Evan, the last month we had a fish kill in Deckers Creek, and I know that's past our water intake. But would that have been the sort of event that would have triggered some kind of response to track it and try and find the source?
yeah, I know folks, like we were in communication with some folks even from that, just from having relationships with Friends of Deckers Creek and other people from DEP, we were sort of informed of what was going on even with that. I think we would want to be kept informed. That was a tricky thing because no one knows exactly where, it's one of those things we don't necessarily know if there was a spill or what caused that sort of thing. But I think having relationships and again, just being in touch, okay, this thing happened, what information do you know? And trying to keep on top of things as much as possible. If there needs to be some sort of action, is it necessary? Do we need to close the intake as soon as we can or just sort of monitor the situation and try to gather information? So.
And we're still not clear on the source of that intake contamination.
Last I checked, DEP didn't know.
Yeah.
But there had been at least one time where there was some unexplained pollution upstream, maybe in Marion County, where MUB sent some people out and did some field monitoring to try to understand exactly what was going on.
When we get something like that, we will, if it's anything significant, we will actively go out and try to find the source or what it is or how much was spilled or whatever happened. We just don't kind of wait for it to come down and say, okay, here it is.
That's a really great thing of the MUB monitor. That the software is we have that data stored, so it's really neat in that sort of situation. You're going out in the field, you're trying to figure it out, but you can also go into this database that we've collected and update and say, what's the likely thing? Are there places that are likely that contamination came from? What kind of chemicals do they have stored? So you can sort of start to think in that sense too. So that's been a really great tool as well. So.
That's a lot of information, actually. I didn't realize.
Very informative.
How
Yeah,
frequent.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Yeah.
Yep.
The documents, I don't even know, hundreds of pages long, I think.
It is.
So.
That's it. For any of the board members, if you want to see the complete version of it, once we compile it, we've got about everything all put together and ready to submit to the DHHR as our revision. I'm glad to make that available to you. We do keep kind of just within the people that need to know, because there is sensitive information in there, and that's also prescribed in the rules and regulations.
Why does this go to DHHR instead of DEP?
Yeah.
Other than that's what the legislation.
Well, DHHR is who regulates the public drinking water.
Okay.
Signing in so we can
DEP has to do with the pollution sources. Although I guess that's changing.
Pretty soon it's going to be the same.
Oh, okay.
So we do this every 3 years.
Pardon me?
We update this every 3 years.
Officially, but as Kendra said, we're constantly,
Constantly,
updating.
right.
Every year we're going to the DEP and saying, give us your above ground storage tank database. Give us all your inspection reports for all the tanks you did in this area. So we update this thing, almost continuously depending when the data is available.
But the official 3-year is what the state requests.
Correct.
Okay. Good.
So as Kendra pointed out, the rules and regs says you make a plan. Everyone knows you take a plan, write it up as careful as you can be, bind it up, put it on a shelf, and then you never see it again until you need to revise it again. We don't have a plan, we have a program. We're constantly looking at it, we're constantly monitoring it, we're constantly updating it and using it. So it's really more of an interactive type thing for us.
Like, do you think maybe once a year, then when that report is done, you could, or somebody could update us? I'd even like to know who's just this side of sketchy. Who's just this side of we're concerned.
You think there are people out there like that?
Oh
Honestly.
my.
I work at the university. How could that ever possibly
Oh,
happen?
my
No, not here.
Yes, I think we can do that.
Thank you.
I'll say that it's kind of been the same group for the past couple of years.
That's kind of the concern for me, is like if it's the same people, at what point do they just push past?
Right. But we have seen that. There was one particular spot that was upstream that was really a concern, and they do not exist anymore. The DEP is monitoring, and they do not have a permit anymore. And DEP has been monitoring and keeping track and sampling and things like that. So,
but they don't have a permit, and there's DEP's monitoring it, but it's still there, and they're still going to continue. And until something really bad happens, they're going to continue.
well, they're not. They're not doing any activity right there at that site. And then we are sampling. We collect quarterly water quality samples just downstream of there, for instance.
For them.
So.
Plus, if that permit would come up for renewal when they submit it in, we know ahead of time. We will actually sit and draft comments and submit them to the DEP, either asking questions or objecting to them reissuing the permit or the limits that they're putting on it, stuff like that.
I just remember the Charleston thing and how, all due respect, inept the legislation and the DEP and any of the agencies were. Yeah, they monitored it. Yeah, they knew it was sketchy. Yeah, they knew it was a problem, and the catastrophe happened anyway. So I'd kind of like to make sure that doesn't happen, regardless of legislation.
And I would just like to say, I think we can't prevent absolutely everything, but
No.
do everything we can to have as much data and have as much information to prevent that scenario. And having all this data that we have, again, close that intake. If there's ever a question, close the intake. We're super, super lucky to have COVID Creek and the new reservoir, and it's very, very easy, and so just trying to stay on top of that.
One point I'd like to make about the rules and regulations gives us all this information we can gather, we can keep, we can watch. It gives us no power to regulate anybody out there. We can't tell them you have to repair that tank or you have to move this tank or anything like that. So we really don't have a lot of teeth in it other than going back to the DEP.
Okay.
Public shame can do wonders.
All right, any other questions? Very interesting information, good information, thorough, very thorough.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. And I'm just passing around the sign-in sheet. If you guys don't mind just signing in, that'll be part of when we resubmit the plan, just to document that folks were here. So appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. Very, very good work.
This is really great.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Good night, Evan. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll put your stuff in that, and then I'll wait just to get this signage. And obviously, source water protection is very important to me, so it feels good to work on this. So.
Absolutely.
Happened on a Thursday night, right before my board of directors meeting.
Oh, did it?
Yes,
Oh
it
my
did.
goodness.
I drove back from Charleston that morning, right by it.
I was supposed to go that weekend. I was actually supposed to go to something for legislature that Friday.
Yeah, all these people have, everybody here has to sign up.
Well,
Did you get
more
it?
the
Oh,
merrier.
yeah, they do, right there.
My students think Evan wants on there.
Yeah,
Funny
better
thing
test that
about-
water.
Yeah, funny thing about that water,
Won't
right?
have any for a while.
Okay.
This maybe, this must be from last
They just do EPH created an online portal system, which is
Yeah.
really nice. And they staggered it a little bit so they could actually review them. This is due October 1st.
I'll be in the sky. Yeah, he's really good.
Yeah.
That's one of the questions I have.
That gets passed down.
To them, yeah, goes in the database, yeah.
Nope.
All right, we'll continue then while the signatures are being gathered there. So now we're at old business. Mike, we have office renovations to discuss.
Yes, Dave Snyder with Omni Architects is here this evening. Just as a reminder, we had the board wanted to see the what removing the proposed second story of the western expansion would look like and moving eastward. So Dave's here this evening to talk a little bit about what he did there. I will say to the board that we haven't had an opportunity, and you have not had an opportunity to really look this over. And so we've just asked Dave to come up and talk about the concept and give us time to review it. And so we can get back to Dave and possibly with any revisions. And then we'll see him again after tonight.
I'm sure. Okay.
Thank you.
So as Mike mentioned, we showed you an option with 3 stories, and you asked us to look at options for 2 stories. We provided some information before as to where that square footage could be found on this level, on this main level, for an addition. We looked at, of course, the basement floor plan did not change. Nothing changed down there, but on this plan here, you can see. This is where we found a little bit of square footage that made the most sense. There's this end of the building over here.
I can't see where you're pointing. Oh, I see.
On the right.
Over here, yeah.
Where the deck is right now.
So this is where we moved that square footage to that was on the 3rd floor. That changed, and of course with that we did not need the elevator any longer, so that elevator was removed. And of course some of the circulation changed a little bit here. really added just a little bit more space to the CSR in this area, really. So those are really the changes to the plan. Just sort of in summary, of course, the renovation square footage did not change. The new addition square footage actually went down about 1,000 square feet. It used to be around 8,600 square feet, and again, that's due to elevator and some things about how that third floor had to lay out based upon the structure below it. So we were able to be a little bit more efficient with the layout on that main level. Some things to consider that happened from going to a 3-story to a 2-story option. Of course, you have some added costs of some additional foundations, roof structure, and of course the roofing material. But you also have some reduced cost. You no longer have a floor structure, the elevator, and like I said, the overall square footage went down a little bit. So, more than likely those things, I think the first 2 items on each one, the added cost in the first 2 items on the reduced cost, more than likely balance themselves out, but that 1,000 square footage will probably make a little bit of difference. Yes?
Question for Mike, or you guys. Does that give you enough room to grow? You don't want to have to do this again in 10 years.
Well, we believe this does give us the room to grow. But again, we do want, as a team, we haven't had an opportunity to sit down with it and go through this revised plan thoroughly, and which we plan to do. We were just able to receive it, and so we think that the overall plan will allow us to grow, and maybe we might look at maybe a little bit further expansion on the eastern side. But right now it looks good.
So what's the current square footage of the structure, and what's the proposed in this?
So the new addition square footage is 7,600 square feet. Mm-hmm. And I can't read that from back here. But the existing square footage of that floor is 8,700 square feet.
Okay.
So total would be 1,500 then, or 1,600?
Yeah, in that general neighborhood, yes.
Okay, good. I saw that 3,300 of renovations, and I thought we were tripling the size of the building, and that it made it seem like it would make more sense to just scrape and start new. But okay, that's good.
Yes.
Do we have cost estimates at this point?
We do not. No. That would be, I think we're looking for an approval of this concept. We will continue, like Mike said, we will continue to, the design will continue to evolve, get into more detail. We look for approval of this. We get some cost estimates from this. We'd start to look at what the outside of the building starts to look like, how the new blends in with the existing. We also should start talking about doing some geotechnical investigation, especially where this other addition is, because the topography falls off pretty quick there. So, that's something that we'll present to you all, our suggestions on what you do there and get that done. But those 3 things should be done before we move much further.
And the staff is going to be reviewing this to see if the workflow configurations are appropriate.
Yes, I got to say, Dave and his team spent a large amount of time on that very issue with staff already.
Dave, on the new addition, I see where it comes out into the parking lot a little bit.
Yes.
I'm assuming that's to avoid deep foundations or some sort of, because it drops off drastically.
Yes,
there,
it
so
drops
move it
off
out
drastically, yes. I don't think we can't push over the hill any further than what we are. Yeah.
How many parking spots?
Well, we've lost from this, we've lost 4, maybe 5. I think on the left we gain 1 or 2 on the left.
Okay.
And that's also part of it. So if you hire more people and you expand, do you have enough parking now for everybody? You might have enough office space. Do you also have enough parking?
Well, I think, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but we did create some parking spaces
Okay.
on the other end of the parking lot, down at the bottom of the page that you can't see.
Yes, that's correct. We did. We're reworking the parking lot a little bit here to be a little more efficient. We had one of those in the previous slide presentations. I'm sorry I don't have it with me, but we were adding a good bit of parking spaces.
As long as you have enough for everybody.
I'd imagine the footers, trusses, and shingles are going to be a lot less as far as the added costs than taking out an elevator shaft and the superstructure for a second floor, items like that.
I think a lot of that will balance out, honestly. It depends what these foundations turn out to be. But if they're simple spread footings, the cost of an elevator alone could be $150,000 just of the elevator, not the construction of where that goes, that square footage.
I'm unfortunately painfully aware of that right now.
Yes.
Foundations can get real expensive real fast too, then.
Okay. All right. Well, the staff can look at this, get the feedback, and bring it back to us if you want to, or at some point.
Yes, well, we will.
So you guys know where you want to be in 10 years and roughly how much growth you expect, so that you know that you think maybe your department's going to add maybe.
That was
over the
part of
next-
this initial analysis that we did with Omni.
Okay.
Is to look ahead and come up with the amount of spaces that we will need down the road, and we did that.
Yeah, that information is recorded in the workflow analysis that we did. It's recorded in that report.
We won't be able to just replace the engineering department with AI.
Yeah.
That's not
AI and
fun.
video games.
No, I thought it was illegal.
I don't. Wait a minute.
Write that down.
That would be a no.
No. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Anybody else got any comments or questions? All right. We'll get everybody involved and look at that and come back and see where we are. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank
David.
you.
Okay, on to
That's
the Cheat
exciting.
Lake wastewater treatment plant upgrades.
Okay, so right now we're still participating in bi-weekly design meetings with Strand Associates. We are continuing our conversation with the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection regarding the state revolving fund loan, as whether it would be a 20 or 30 year term. We are working towards the 30-year term. And we've also started the process of exploring the private market to see.
It'll be more expensive.
Well, we want to make sure we cover all bases.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that way we know for sure. So we're still waiting to hear back from DEP. We've had some meetings with them, so we'll wait to see what their thoughts are.
And you can do a 30-year note, and then in a few years, 5 years, or whatever it's going to take for it to come back down and refinance.
And that's the real nice about going out to the market. The opportunity to refinance.
I would just get an arm.
Okay, mental note, Eric is not in charge.
Do not
It's gonna be
ask
more like a
Do not
leg.
ask Eric.
All right. Well, next Chief View, PSD.
Okay, I'm going to let Jeff talk a little bit about what we've got going on there, since this is in his realm.
Yeah, so I've drafted the first draft of the documents necessary to move forward with formal consolidation. And those have been sent out to council for cheap review. You may have heard that another member of the cheap review board of directors has passed away.
Oh, no.
Yeah, Alan Colbank.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So the county commission is in the process of appointing a new member because they do not have a quorum in order to formally move forward. So until that happens, we're just kind of stuck. We think it'll happen pretty quickly.
Okay, so that's where we are, just waiting for that so we can process the final transfer.
Yeah, the next step is going to be chief new board formally approving the consolidation.
And then it'll come here for us to approve.
As well as the county commission.
Right. And then city council.
City council will not.
Oh, that's
be involved.
outside the city. That's right.
At this point, there's no debt being assigned.
Right.
Are we, though, planning on approaching council? This is informational session?
Well, I think we have technically.
Yes, that's Dave's
but
job.
we will certainly we will approach City Council as far as tariff approval, because the tariff will need to be updated to include the cheap new rates.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Coven Creek #1 dam project.
Yes, so we're complete now with Coven Creek Dam #1. All of the betterments there. The overflow weir is completed. The grass is growing. We've completed our reclamation plan that we had agreed to with Bow Park and the city about regarding the road down into White Park, and so it looks really nice. We did have a few trees that didn't survive. We have spoken to the nursery, and we'll get those replaced probably next month. So things look really nice. They're coming up. So for construction projects like this, it takes a couple growing seasons to look like it wasn't just done. So, but it is coming up, and it looks very nice down there.
Now, these are the trees that we obligated ourselves to replace when we did the initial work in White Park, or is this just in conjunction with
this project and for the new sewer line that we laid in White Park?
Okay,
So,
what about the original trees?
Those are being taken care of by the city,
Okay.
and we have paid that invoice.
Okay, do we have any word from the city on when those will be installed? Because this has been dragging on for about 4 years, I think.
Well, they just bid them out, and we just paid that invoice just a few months ago, Rich. And so I think they have a plan that they're going to follow. They're going to start this fall.
Okay.
And so I think they're ready to go.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that my understanding is that they'll not only just be at White Park, but they'll be used for other areas as well. So there's a total number of trees, and then those trees will be dispersed where the city feels appropriate. And I think part of it too is the trail system needs to be put in place too to determine where maybe some additional trees might need to go once that recreational amenity is put in place. And I think everything looks good from my understanding. I think that when we're at a point, the city would like to do a walkthrough. And I'd like to be a part of that if possible. And
Absolutely.
just review everything, make sure everybody's on the same page and such.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the best part about this is it's so much safer. I know that the appearance has changed somewhat, but that was a necessary adjustment that had to be made. And we were very sensitive to the fact that a lot of people really, really enjoy the Coven Creek #1 and take their families there, even though we're very concerned about their safety. So I was down there with Mike this week, and everything looks really nice, new in some places. So we know the weather will take care of some of that, make it look more natural. But
Yeah, I've not heard any negative feedback personally through any of my social networks or through the city. So
good.
I think people hopefully understood that it needed to be done.
Yes, we really couldn't ignore it. So we're glad it's over. It'll be nice now. All right, and the Flegel Reservoir.
And so the guardrail installation is complete now, and it looks very nice. They did a wonderful job. Signage is being installed. It's quite a few of the signs have already been installed. The boat ramp's completed. The bollards are in. Canal Stone, there's a little fencing that I think they have left. They may have already started on that, Rich. I don't know.
I believe they have. It was associated with some rights of way that we had for the project, and there's also a gate, one gate that they have to install. But just we're talking really minor stuff now, but they still have a little bit of work to do.
So isn't the road going to be repaved for part of that too?
Yeah.
Not by Canola.
Yeah.
I'll let Rich speak to you're talking about the Upper Coven side.
Yeah.
Upper Coven. Yeah, I'll let Rich talk a little bit about that with our partnership.
Yeah, so we did have a meeting with the Department of Highways out there to look at Upper Coven Creek from our project up to the Kingwood Pike, and have we've agreed to partner to get that. There's some areas, some culverts that need to be replaced, and a couple areas of full depth work that needs to happen, and then resurfacing of that road. And so that we're waiting on an agreement from the DOH so that we can get started doing that. But we verbally agreed out there to jointly attack that project and get that done.
Rich, is the city participating in that? I thought, look at my notes, that the city had offered to the DOH to help with the widening and paving of that.
Yeah, so there's no widening involved in what we're talking about, but the city has expressed an interest in potentially doing some widening, and I think that they're going to work directly with the DOH to see if that's possible out there.
Great.
Okay. Progress. Upper Pocono Run.
More progress to
More
report.
progress.
Yeah, we're E.L. Robinson. They've hired a right-of-way agent, and so I think right now we have about 30 in hand, which I think is a little bit more than half, Rich, at this point. All-Star Ecology, they're working through some of the comments from the Army Corps of Engineers and on the stream permitting. So that's working well. We were just talking with Damien over at the city this week about the floodplain permits, and so I think those are almost ready to be issued as well. So I think everything is moving along nicely.
Yes, and I think a lot of people are going to really appreciate this. We certainly hope so.
Hopefully they appreciate it during the construction.
Yes, that's going to be the
I've
inconvenience.
kind of put that warning out there a few times of it's not going to be the prettiest during construction, but once it's done, it's going to be nice.
Good. All right, Brownfields Grant.
Yeah, I'm going to let Rich talk a little bit about that. He's overseeing that project.
So Greenbrier Environmental Group is our consultant on the project, and they're working on a couple of things right now. They got some comments back again from EPA on their quality management plan, and so they're working on those minor comments, and they're also working on an ABCA, which is an analysis of brownfields cleanup alternatives report or plan, and they expect that's the document that has to go through a 30-day public notice. Basically says, here's the plan, here's what we're going to do. And your read ahead says that it's going to be next week. I did get both of those plans, the APCA document and the quality management plan revision, for us to review. So we have that in hand now. So next week, latest, we'll get that back to them so that they can submit both of those to the EPA. So the ABCA, once it's approved by the EPA, which typically doesn't take that long, maybe a week or two, that's when the 30-day notice would go out. We would provide that document to the public notice, give them an opportunity to give us any comments, address those comments. And once that 30-day period is over, is when we could go out to bid for demolition. Go out to bid for that work, which is really where we want to get. We want to get those two buildings down, and so we're kind of on track to do that here probably in the next couple of months.
Good. All right, General Manager's report. Let us know what's happening.
Well, the South Park tank is finished, so it looks really nice, a nice green. And so I think we have a little bit of road work that we're going to do, some restoration, but the tank is in service. So that's good to have now that all the students are back in town.
How long does a project like that take? Or how long did that one take?
That's longer than normal because there were some structural repairs we had to do inside the tank.
Yeah.
And so it's typical that you find things like that once you get in there. There were substantially more repairs that we had to do on this one. In fact, our consultant said that this probably is the last go around for this tank. So that kind of prolonged it a little bit. Typically a couple months. This one was a little bit longer.
That was on change orders?
There were some change orders, yes.
Hey,
The structural work.
needed to be done.
Yes, it did.
You don't know until you're inside.
Right.
Okay. Bear Street.
So on the August 25th, we received about 1.5 inches of rain in 30 minutes. So that was quite the storm. And I will say this, that we were able to see where the rain was falling in Morgantown because of the weather stations we've put in. Who got the most, where these areas. So there was some damage. We had some significant damage to the asphalt that we just put in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always nice. Go back. A big sinkhole developed near the retaining wall, but the wall did not move. It's in great shape, structurally sound. And so we have a crew scheduled tomorrow to start that repair. And so we'll be working with the contractor to do the paving for us. So we'll have that project. We should have all that wrapped up here in October. That's our goal.
The asphalt damage, was that due to improper stormwater management? Was it due to the way in which the repaving of the asphalt? Maybe an improper milling of the prior asphalt? Is there any causal reason other than the 1.5 inches?
Yes,
Yeah.
there is. Rich, you want to talk a little bit about the box and what occurred there?
Yeah, so going back, so the project included, there was it's a combined system. So there was a box that was combined storm sewer that ran down Baird Street and then went over the hill across the rail trail to Deckers. What we did was we put an inlet structure and separated the two, storm and sewer. It's a separation project. And the inlet where we did that has it's a big concrete box that has a concrete lid that sits down on it. And when the storm surge happened, the water pushed that lid up.
Oh, really? Because of the gravity coming down that hill?
It was before, it's still, down Baird Street. So it didn't, not the box going down over, but on Baird Street, which is still a pretty significant slope.
Yeah.
And it's a bolted down manhole on top of that, so the manhole couldn't come up, and it lifted that lid up. And so the water went between the lid and the box under the asphalt.
Okay.
And it worked its way down to the bottom there, and that's what kind of washed out and made voids underneath that asphalt, which caused it to sink.
But the water went exactly where it was supposed to go.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, that's unfortunately not a unique thing to happen in situations like that. I mean, when we wastewater facilities in Indiana, we did a big CSO project. Same thing where manholes and the whole structure, same thing, and much busier road than Baird Street.
Yeah.
And a much larger project than Baird Street too.
Okay. Any other questions about those? All right. Do the board members have anything they wish to bring forward or any discussion?
I'd like to thank Mike and I'm sure staff that have been involved in answering some of my questions so promptly that have come to me from constituents or other council members. So it's been very helpful and appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good. Keep those questions coming. Anytime you need answers, this staff has them all. So we can always get back to the people in the community and let them know what the answers are.
So keep those cards and letters coming.
Yes. I just like to once again say how much I enjoyed the picnic, the part that I could attend. And I think the staff appreciate it, and I'm glad we're able to do that. And I encourage everybody to attend next year. I'm assuming we're going to do this again. I
Yes,
think everybody looks forward to it.
The staff appreciation luncheon is very popular. The staff really appreciates it. And when board members can mingle, they really enjoy that. And so it was a good time.
I was disappointed I couldn't come. I came last year and the year before, and it was
I
always
know,
fun,
yeah.
and the food was good.
Yeah, I wish I was able to attend as well. It would sure beat the meal I was eating in my car on the way back from Huntington.
But I enjoyed it because I was there and I ate for both of you.
Thank you so much.
Food was good, yes.
I was at PT.
Oh, well. All right. Do I have a motion to go into executive session?
I move to convene an executive session of the Board of Directors under the provisions of West Virginia Code Section 6-9A-4B2 and 12 to discuss personnel matters, confidential matters, and matters which are exempt from disclosure under the West Virginia Freedom of Information Act. And further move that the September 21, 2023 regular meeting of the Board of Directors be adjourned at the conclusion of the executive session.
Second.
All right. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. So we'll have a